Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Kuf Tes Vov Amud Beis. Starting with Daf Kuf Tes Vov Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the bottom. The Gemara previously discussed karpas, dipping the vegetable into salt water. Now the Gemara discusses really the second siman of the Seder. That means after Kaddish is urchatz, washing one's hand before the karpas. Says the Gemara, Omar Rabbi Elozar, Omar Rabbi Oshaya, Kol shetibuloi b'mashke tzorich netilas yodayim. Anybody's going to then take a vegetable and he will dip it into, let's say, salt water, he will require netilas yodayim. Since the Chacham were goyzer stam yodayim to be shniyos, and therefore they were goyzer if one would touch his yadayim that are stam onto mashkin, thereby it would make the mashkin into a rishon. So therefore he says you're required to then wash your hands and tilas yadayim before taking a vegetable and dipping it, let's say, into salt water. Rav Papa said, Shma Mino, we can derive from here the fact that our Mishnah is talking about a case where you only have chazeres, you only have your mower, your chasa, for your karpas. We can derive from here the following: Haychasa tzorich l'shakuye becharoises mishum kapo. Says Rav Papa, we can derive from this statement that you must take the karpas, in this case it's the chazeres, the chasa, and you must submerge it into the charoises because of kapo. What is kapo? Kapo is explained by the Rishonim as being a certain toilas, a certain worm that is very uncommon but deadly, and therefore in order to then get rid of it, to make sure it's dead, one then has to submerge it into the charoises. It's therefore so uncommon that one is not normally concerned about it, but because of the danger, therefore we're required to then submerge it in the charoises. So therefore, if it's indeed submerged, one might then take his hands, and indeed it's likely that his hands will then touch the charoises. Where there's liquid there's going to be wine that's mixed with the charoises. So therefore, if his hands were stam yodayim and they are shniyos, he'll make the charoises into a rishon. So it must be that he has to wash his hands. And not only that, we derive from here that the way he then is dipping the chazeres is completely submerging it into the charoises. Because if you're going to say that it does not have to be submerged entirely, then netilas yadayim lamali, why would he have to wash his hands? He's not going to be touching the charoises, the wine in the charoises. Elamai must be that he does have to submerge it. V'dilma, says the Gemara, la'olam eimalach lo tzarich lishkuei. Maybe he really does not have to submerge it. V'kapa mericha mais, and this tolas called kapa, which is deadly, it dies from just the mere fact that it smells, it comes in contact with the smell of the charoises. Ella, in that case, lamali netilas yadayim, dilma mish. In this case, why do you have to wash your hands? Dilma mishakule, because maybe he will submerge it. He doesn't have to, but maybe he will. Rav Papa and Rav Papa said in another statement, Lo nishi inish mor b'charoises. One should not leave the mor in the charoises, because he explains Dilma agav chalia detavle mevatle leile merure. Because by leaving it into the charoises, it'll then cause the juice of the charoises to then mevatel the merirus of the mor. Ubain and tam mor veleka, and we need, when we eat the mor, to have a tam of the mor, of the merirus, and you won't have it as a result of leaving it too long into the charoises. Adabe Rav Chizil Ravona Ukve Vidorash. Rav Chizda, he led Ravona Ukva to make the following, to allow him to make the following drasha. Nota yadav betibul rishon, nota yadav betibul sheni. Not only does one have to wash his hands in the beginning, before he washes for karpas, he'll also have to wash his hands again for the mor. Now truthfully, he'll anyways have to wash his hands before the mor, because he has to wash his hands for the matzah. But we're saying over here that the fact that he has to then wash his hands, it's required 2 types of washing. it's not good enough just that he wash his hands first. Amur Rabbanan kamei de Rab Papa. The Rabbanan said before Rab Papa, ha be'alma itmar. Here he's talking about be'alma. He must be talking about in a regular case, not of Leil HaSeder. And therefore he's saying you have to wash twice, because who normally eats 2 dippings, and therefore after the first dipping he was mesiach das, thereby he has to take his hands and wash them again before the second dipping. These because if you're going to say over here on Leil HaSeder we're talking about you have to wash your hands twice. Why would you have to wash your hands twice? Zimna, you already washed your hands once. If you already have your hands once and you already have intention to then go ahead and make a second dipping, there's no reason to wash your hands a second time. Rapapu said to them, on the contrary, over here on Leil HaSeder we're talking about that he said you have to wash your hands twice. Because if you're going to think that it's going to talk about the regular night that's not Leil HaSeder, then lama litrei tivuli? Why would he ever have to wash? And how would he have to make 2 types of tibulim? Rather, we're talking about must be Leil HaSeder. Elamai hocha itmar. Rather, you're saying over here on Leil HaSeder we're talking about then netilas yadayim trei zimna lamali. Why would he have to make his hands washed twice? He already washed it once, and again he already knows he's going to have to wash. He's going to have to be matbil. He's going to have to make another tvila and be toivel his morah again. So therefore, why would it require a second washing? Amre, they said, kivan de boy lemeimar agat v'halel. Since he has to say the haggadah and the halel in between the karpas and the moror, dilma asuche yasche ledaite v'noga. Maybe he'll mesiach das and he'll accidentally touch one of the makomos hamechusim, which would require another netila. In other words, there'll be hezech hadas. Gemara says, "Vaiter Amar Rave." Rave teaches us the following din in regards to eating the matzah and eating the moror. Bola matzah yotza. One who swallows matzah, he's yotza. Why? Because it's derech achila. It's considered to be he's oichel the matzah, and he fulfilled his requirement of be'erev toichlu matzos. He did eat it, only he swallowed it. Bola moror lo yotza. However, if he swallowed more, he's not yotza because more requires merirus. When you eat the more, you have to taste the merirus. Since it says that they embittered our lives in the shibud Mitzrayim, and therefore he's not yotza eating the more that way. Bola matzah umor yidei matzah yotzi yidei more lo yotza. Rava says if he swallowed both of them together, matzah together with the more, so he's yotza the matzah, he's not yotza the more. And here we have a question because previously we learned that the mitzvah diaraisa, which is matzah by erev toichlu matzos, and the mitzvah of mor bismaninu is only dirabanan. So l'chora the mitzvah dirabanan shemavatil the mitzvah diaraisa. How come over here you yotzei the mitzvah diaraisa of matzah? And the answer over here is because here there's no tam. Here he's swallowing both the matzah and the mor. Therefore, he does fulfill the mitzvah of achilas matzah because of nechshav and achila. But again, mor he's not yotzei because he doesn't have any taste of the mor. The final din that Rava teaches us is bola karchan besiv ubolon afide matzah nami lo yotza. Here, if he wraps it in the sieve and he then puts both the matzah and the mor inside, so then he's not going to be yotze, not even the matzah, because over here it's not even considered derech achila. He wasn't oichel the matzah. Says the Gemara weiter, Omar Rav Simi bar Ashi, matzah lifnei kol echod ve'echod. They put matzah in front of each and every one at the seder. Mor lifnei kol echod ve'echod. They put mor in front of each person in front of the seder. Ve'charoises lifnei kol echod ve'echod, as well as charoises. In other words, talking about the ka'ara over here. So all of these things are going to be then put in front of each person. Bizmanom, they had indeed little tables, and those tables were individualized, whereby each one had their ka'ara. But, says Rav Simi bar Ashi, we only remove the shulchan in front of the one who is the leader making the Haggadah. Bizmanenu, that would mean that even if you have one person who's leading the Seder, So here it would mean that you don't have to then take the table because we don't have individual tables, but you would take the Seder plate, either remove from the table itself, or take the Seder plate and put it on the other side of the table. Rav Huna Omar, Rav Huna said, Kulu nami lifnei misha oimer haggadah. Rav Huna argues that all of it is done only from the one who's leading the Haggadah. Only he is required to have the matzah, the moror, the charoises, etc. The hilchas ke Rav Huna. And indeed, the halacha is like Rav Huna. Ask the Gemara, lama oikrin es hashulchan. Why do we do that? Again, bizmanenu would mean taking the Seder plate, and before the Magid, we would take the Seder plate and we would move it either outside, remove it all together, or we would put it on the other side of the table. Why would we remove it from the Balabayas who's leading the Seder? Answers the Gemara, Amrei the Bei Rabbi Yonai, Kedeshi Yakiru Tinoikos Vishalu. Because it will then be ma'arer, the curiosity of the children, and that will then cause them to ask questions. In other words, the whole form of the Haggadah Shel Pesach is built on she'ela v'teshuva, getting the child to ask, and whereby answering his questions. Abai, the Gemara tells us, Hava Yosif Kamei de Rabba. It tells us that Abai was sitting before Rabba on Leil HaSeder. Chazed the kol madle taka mekamei. He saw that they were moving the table in front of Rabba, who was leading the Seder. Amar Lahu, Abaye curiously said, Adayin lo ka'achalin asu kama akre taka mikamon. We haven't yet ate, and now you're going to remove the table before us. Omar le Rabbi said to Abaye, Patarta miloymar manishtane. You were poiter me from saying manishtane, because now you already then asked the question. Tosfos says it's not specifically pattering from the 4 questions of manishtana. Take a quick look at his Tosfos on the bottom. Tosfos says, Kedesha yakir atinuk v'yishal, kloimar, umitoich kach yavo lishol b'shar dvorim. This will then lead him to then ask other questions. Aval b'ma sheshal lema anu oikin hashulchan lo yipad mimanishtane. That question is not going to then suffice to then pater the 4 questions of manishtane. It will only be a lead-in. It's only talking about that he began the shayla which will lead into the 4 questions of manishtane.